Action Defense Committee to add a historical perspective and her thoughts on today's findings. Ms. Steele?
Thank you, Alicia. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks to the Ontario Human Rights Commission, Renu Mandani, Chief Commissioner, and her team for this interim report on their inquiry into racial profiling and racial discrimination of Black persons by the Toronto Police Service. Today, December the 10th, 2018, International Human Rights Day, it is totally disheartening that we are still discussing the violence of anti-Black racism. This report is definitely not news to the Black community. It informs the wider community in Ontario that we in the Black community live this abuse and brutality on a daily basis. The history of police violence against the Black community is a sordid one. The Black Action Defense Committee was formed when Buddy Evans was shot on August 9, 1978. The murder of Albert Johnson on August 26, 1979, in his home galvanized the Black community because there was the realization that the police was behaving and operating as if they're in the southern United States. The Black Action Defense Committee is a volunteer non-profit community-based organization formalized in 1988 after the outrageous police shooting death of Lester Donaldson, an unarmed Black man with mental health issues in his rooming house, hiding behind a mattress. The incident further galvanized the community to action against racism and discrimination in the criminal justice system. It was formed particularly to advocate for police reforms and to provide support to families of victims of police shootings. It is very reasonable to say that things haven't changed. Have you ever witnessed a convoy of police cars that rain down on the Black community for the simplest of issues? Have you ever noticed on the streets of Toronto that the majority of the vehicles pulled over by police are Black drivers? Have you ever witnessed a young Black man with mental health issues having his leg broken after it was stepped on by a Toronto police officer because he was too tall? They couldn't get him in the car easily. Have you ever witnessed a young Black youth being arrested and taken to the police station from school before his parents are contacted? Everyone likes to talk about anecdotal stories. These are not anecdotes. They are the lived experiences of daily life in the Black community in Toronto for decades. During the 70s and 80s, the violence the Black community experienced came from the police and the criminal justice system that sided with them. Instead of dealing with the attitudes and violence of Toronto police, the indifferent politicians began to study us. As a community, we have been studied to death. And all of those reports are sitting on shelves gathering dust and mud, and the Black community continues to face the savagery of Toronto police. The Claire Lewis report of 1989 leads a long list of reports on the Black community. If the findings of those reports had seen the light of day, we would not be mired in this abyss today. And if you read the report, you will notice that the treatment of Black persons in our community have not changed. This report looks at the period 2010 to 2017 through our lenses and the lived experiences of the Black community. This is intergenerational anti-Black racism. I didn't look this bad when I started this. I had black hair. The ugliness that continued exists in the Black community is directly linked to strong anti-black racism in the criminal justice system led by the police. Over-policing, brutality, murder, over-representation in the prison industrial complex, racism, and specifically anti-black racism in every section of the justice system. All of that contributes to the designed failure of the black community. Whether you are a homeowner or a tenant, black people pay property taxes that pay the salaries and benefits of the Toronto Police. It is egregious that we are actually paying these expenses to people who live in distant places to come to Toronto and disrespect and abuse us in the black community. We are an informed community. We are not stupid. The City of Toronto allowed the Toronto Police Association to run things for many years by bullying and threatening, and the result of that is a Toronto Police Service that supervises itself and does whatever it wants. Ontario provincial governments have allowed 25 years to pass before anyone looked at how policing is done in the province of Ontario. The former Liberal government had the courage to look at how policing is done and made significant changes in Bill 175, 2018, to give communities the kind of policing that is right for the 21st century. And this new government has put those implementations on hold. The overused word safety does not apply to the black community. The black community is most unsafe, and when we lift our voices in resistance, the politicians ignore our demand for action, thereby rendering us voiceless. We will never stop resisting injustice. We are not voiceless. We have taken our case to the United Nations, painting them the reality picture of life in Canada. The federal government has this information, and they too must act on it. Because we pay police officers salaries and benefits, the police actually work for us. They are supposed to do far better than they have been doing. Relationships can never be built on brutality. The black community must be treated better. We have been on the hamster wheel long enough. It is time. My advice to the younger black generation: you must continue to fight against the totally unacceptable policing that currently exists. Hold the various levels of government responsible for allowing our communities to be victimized by people our property tax dollars pay. The ugliness that currently exists in our community is designed, and we must push back hard on those who are complicit in the status quo. Many black community icons have worked assiduously over the decades to make life better for the black community. Akua Benjamin, Dudley Laws, Charles Roach, Sharona Hall, Denham Jolly, Hewitt Loeb, Kingsley Gilliam, to name a few. Most of them have passed on, but you are here, and you must resist the status quo. Many of us are tired after decades of resistance and speaking truth to power. What is happening now has been happening for decades. It is wrong. It is racist. It must be stopped. The time has come. It is time. It is time. Thank you.
Yes.
Ms. Steele, I want to thank you for using your voice and for sharing your thoughts with us today. That wraps up the formal remarks for this morning. If you'd like more information on our work on criminal justice issues, check out our website at www.ohrc.on.ca or follow us on social media at @OntHumanRights. If you're looking for additional reports, you can check in at the desk that you signed in at, and we have more reports for you there. I now ask Chief Commissioner Mandani and our guests to come to the front, and we'll open it up for some media questions. Thank you for joining us. So what we're thinking is, if you can just say who you'd like the question to be pointed to, and then you can ask it to them. Austin? Yeah.
Why is this happening?
Can you elaborate? Why is what happening?
Your findings, the discrimination. What is the basis of that?
So this is an analysis of two sort of complete data sets. The SIU data along with the case law that we've obtained and analyzed. It doesn't really answer the question of why. This is data that shows and proves disparities, but we believe that it requires a response from the Toronto Police. So I think it's up to them to explain why we see these disparities, and we look forward to hearing that explanation.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Catherine McDonald from Global. What would ideally be the outcome you'd like to see from the Toronto Police?
So we, at this interim stage, have a number of recommendations that we've made. The first is simply to acknowledge the seriousness of our findings and to accept that they are serious and warrant further action. We're calling on the Toronto Police to immediately collect and release race-based data, and we're calling on the board to mandate the service to do that. We're calling on Ontario to implement Justice Tulloch's recommendations on police oversight. And finally, on the City of Toronto to implement the recommendations in the Toronto Action Plan to confront anti-Black racism.
Hi, Philippe Demoncy from Canada. So the police just responded via press release saying that they're open to having this discussion and whatnot. But how do you make sure that these recommendations that you're making have teeth, that they actually get implemented?
Thank you, and of course I welcome hearing further from the Toronto Police Service as to specific commitments that they are willing to make at this time. So the Commission's inquiry is ongoing. As mentioned by a number of the speakers, we've looked at serious injury and death, and we've looked at case law. We still want to analyze carding and other stops and searches, along with lower level use of force incidents. And after that time, we'll be putting forward a more fulsome set of recommendations. And as people likely know, the Commission does have enforcement powers under the Human Rights Code. And obviously, we hope the police will adopt our recommendations now and at a later point. But we are also open to using the powers under the Human Rights Code.
Yeah.
What triggered this study this time? Is it the Daphne Miller case in December 2016, I believe?
So the Ontario Human Rights Commission has a very long history with the Toronto Police Service. And that dates back to a number of cases that were filed in the 2000s related to racial profiling, and that ultimately culminated in the Commission entering into a formal partnership with the Toronto Police Service over the number of years. That partnership lasted from 2007 to 2010. And after that, we saw insufficient progress on the recommendations we had made in 2010. And after the high-profile incidents, for example, involving Andrew Loku, Daphne Miller, the incident involving the boys on Neptune 4, we decided that it was time to bring a quantitative approach to this problem and actually start to look into racial disparity data.
Yeah. To Madam Chief Commissioner and probably Scott Wortley, you have selected a number of official records for analysis. I note that coroner's jury recommendations were not among them. And I just wondered whether you had given that some thought and whether it's something that could be added to the mix, because over the last 3 decades, coroner's juries have made numerous recommendations about policing conduct and policing behavior, which have not been implemented.
So-
And the jury, coroner's jury recommendation from the Andrew Luku inquest is the most comprehensive of them all. And so it would be good to include this among the data that you examined.
So we will be looking at coroner's inquest recommendations. The reason we haven't outlined them here is because they're publicly available, and so we don't need to use our inquiry powers to obtain them. But we've already started to analyze all of the recommendations made over the last 30 years to see areas that have been recommended to the police numerous times, and that will include looking at the LOCU recommendations along with other coroner's inquests. I think that's sufficient for.
Cynthia?
I have a, sorry, go ahead.
What are your concerns about the politics behind this? Because as previously noted, the Liberal government had put changes into place. They've now been put on pause by the Ford government. What is your message to the Ford government over this? And what are your concerns about this being put on pause, about what might happen next politically?
So we had written to the new government shortly after they took office to encourage them to move forward with the reforms in the Safer Ontario Act. As I understand it, they are doing some more consultation, and they have formally responded to our report in a letter and indicated that they will consider our report as they revise or consider how to move forward with reforms. I think that our report is very consistent with Justice Tulloch's recommendations, and it really speaks to why we need to strengthen police oversight, including related to the SIU.
Are you concerned that it's going to be watered down by this new government?
Of course.
I think it'd be premature. We don't know what this new government's plans are, but certainly part of the reason we decided to release this complete data set related to the SIU was to inform the government as it starts to think about what aspects of Justice Tulloch's report to implement.
I have a question for Sam and Valerie. Thanks. I have a question for Sam and Valerie. You guys both mentioned that the findings of this type of report are nothing new for the community, that you've seen it before. And Sam, I believe, you can correct me wrong, you said something to the effect of you're hoping this isn't just another report. So from a community perspective, what has to happen going forward for this to be not just another report?
I don't know if I have used the language just another report. We as a community, there are lots of studies on us. If you went back to the Claire Lewis report in 1989, same old, same old. There's a long list of them. This is a good report in terms of making sure you keep this issue on the front burner. But it is something that we have been living with for a long time. And if you look in Denham Jolly's book, in My Black Life, the first page of that book talks about Denham as a 72-year-old man having a fender bender, and the police came to take charge even though he never had to take charge. And when he refused to get a tow truck, because the man already had CAA, when he refused to get a tow truck to tow the car because the car was perfectly normal and could go, he could drive it to a garage, the young police officer said to him, "What do I have to do to get you to comply? Put a gun to your head." It's right here in the book, in the black. So I am saying to you, this is an everyday experience. This is not new. The final report won't be new We live this every day, not specifically any one person, but it is the common thread that is sewn through the tapestry of the black community. Negativity from the police, disrespect, brutality, sometimes murder, and just plain intimidation. And for people coming from places where they have had negative encounters with the police, and to come and to sit and listen to us talk about our history with the Toronto police, things have to change, and we have to make sure that they change. And we thank Renew and her team for making certain that it remains on the front burner, because as I said before in my report, when we raise our voices to speak about what ails us, indifferent politicians render us voiceless, but we will never be voiceless.
Thank you for the question. I think what I wanted to make obvious or apparent also is the relationship police generally have with black and racialized communities, right? And there are parts in the city where police don't have that kind of presence. So that is entirely possible, right? So how is the Toronto Police going to respond? How are they going to work with the OHRC? And how are we going to get politicians at the table? That changes that relationship between policing and black communities, right? So I think what it would mean to me is doing something they have not yet done. Because at some point, all the little recommendations, we're talking about a transformation, right? Of the relationship between police and racialized communities. So how will the TPS come to the table and respond to the calls and then move forward with a certain set of openness, transparency with regards to the data? Are we going to see cooperation? These are the questions. And I think that would signal something for us, maybe a turning point, and we're definitely needed, right? So.
Yeah. May I add something to the mix? The question was asked back there, I think it was the first question, why is this happening? And the answer is in the title of the thing, Anti-Black Racism. Let me give you a little bit more history. Back in 1971, there was a spate of incidences involving police that made the headlines on Contrast, the local black newspaper. And in sometime in the spring of 1971, a series of incidents came up in Regent Park. And Harold Hoyt, the editor of Contrast, made a headline and he superimposed the headlines from all other incidents and other papers before on the front page. So the whole front page story was headlines after headlines of police abuse in the black community, brutality and other kinds of things.